I'm Karin Pleasant. Pronouns she, her. If somebody says they, but that doesn't bother me. Um, and I'm a psychotherapist, registered dance movement therapist, and my history of dancing and how I connect with dancing starts at a very young age with formal lessons in a dance studio and going up through there, but dancing just generally as a part of, as an expressive part of how I move through the world has something I recognized as probably as a teenager when or even before that, it was like a preteen, like choreographing something, um, and just for fun, but just having it be a thing that I do just seemed like part of something that I didn't really recognize as important as it is now, until I was a little bit older. And in the blues realm, I think being exposed to the music at a young age, just from music my parents listened to, or going to different festivals, music festivals, or performances with them, it's like very comfortable and familiar in terms of a sound and something that I connect to.
Yeah, great. Yeah. So I was gonna ask, like, growing up, so you said like dance as an identity was more a little bit older, but like when you were little, was your family dancing? Were you dancing with them or anything? Just like in the house or at parties?
I think the interesting thing about my parents, even though like in terms of the different types of music, I think I used to identify like blues and jazz as older people's music because that was we went to jazz festivals and things. Like there would be like different festivals, whether it was at home in Flint or if we were visiting family in Chicago. Like there's just certain kind of music that was the music that you would tend to hear or be connected to. So I I think I used to see those because that it was with them that I heard that type of music. But they were not dancers or movers. That's something that I I think it was just not, and my sister took dance lessons too, but I don't think that she herself necessarily I think at this stage identifies as a dancer, and I definitely do. So yeah, like music, being like really like into music and listening to all different kinds of music was always a thing. Watching dancing was a thing. I think the other thing became obsessed with was just watching every dance show that happened to be on that you could see at some point as a kid. So to me, watching people dance and imitating or dancing was very, very common too. So it's like Dance Fever, Solid Gold, American Bandstand, Soul Train, then later on Club MTV, other things like like just watching dancing and having people seeing with people my age, Dance Party USA, or seeing other people dancing to all different kinds of music. So that was like a connection to see having it be a part of my life, even though a lot of people in my family, aside from my mother's younger sister, like she's the one person who was like, oh yeah, if
Oops.
something's gonna
Are you still there?
be, yeah, can you hear me?
Sorry, it was like you said, it wasn't very much dancing except for your mother, or I
My
think you
mother's
said.
younger sister.
Okay.
So she had two sisters. The younger sister was definitely the one in the family who was like, if someone's gonna get up and dance, it would definitely be her. And then if we had family functions, that's when I saw other people dancing, like my oldest brother, or if I got my sister up to dance, she would dance, or other family, definitely. But that wasn't until we were like at family reunions or other functions and stuff, but not so much in the house.
Not so much, yeah, as a kid,
Yeah.
except for at the festivals. Yeah. And then real quick for like self-identity, do you identify as a Black woman, African American? Like, do you have any kind of, or do you just like not have a particular preference for how you identify racially?
We always said we were Black people, like in the house. Like it wasn't like the African American thing started, I shouldn't call it a thing like that, but African American, that was like middle schoolish when that term. And I remember my parents being, they were like kind of like part of like they were like silent generation type people. Like my dad's in his 90s. So it's just like having another new term for them because they had already had a couple at that point. So it was just like Black. Of course, yeah, at this point, I'm older now. I'm used to hearing African American, so either's fine.
Yeah, so it's just interesting because I think that the academic world, I think they might have been slightly what was pushed, like was the one like, oh, we should say African American, but now they've come around to be like, look, a lot of people actually prefer Black. So like the most recent handbook says, if they prefer it, do Black with the uppercase B,
Mhm.
So we're trying to avoid African Americans. So I'm like, this is it's just very interesting to see like depending on what age someone is, sometimes they have like there's a very specific age range that seems to prefer African American, but otherwise most people say Black.
Mhm.
So I was just curious. Yeah, so I have this question about like athleticism. So we've talked about dancing, but like what have you experienced athleticism emphasized as a practice or value as a Black American?
Like athleticism, so sports was big in my family. So, like my brothers and I played a lot of sports. It was like the thing, aside from dancing, it was the thing that I did as a kid. So, and it was something that very much was celebrated in the family. Like it was also very much critiqued. So it was like everybody's competitive, you want to be good. Being good enough was a thing. So there was like pressure around that. And so yeah, that like and my mother always, if there is a game of something on, she's watching a sport and very, very critical. So it's just like wanting to be achieved and athletics being an achievement was something in the household.
Yeah. So that's only a value. Have you ever experienced like a negative stereotype from athleticism associated with Blackness or not so much maybe?
Um, well, I don't know in terms of like saying anything directly. I think there's other things people had this idea of like dumb jocks, or you
Mm.
you hear that phrase. I feel like more of that is geared toward men who are athletes. I remember one time somebody telling me it was a family friend who said like my sister and I she did like she was on the honor society and she did well in school whatever. She was in high school at the time. I think I was in middle school and they said that she was the brains and I was the brawn or something like that. And I'm like, you mean because I'm an athlete? And it's not like I couldn't get amazing grades. Sometimes I did when I tried and sometimes I didn't. But that was the only weird comment I ever received directly. But when I would hear the dumb jock, like kind of stereotype, usually I felt like it was being geared toward men.
Okay. Yeah, that's because that's been interesting. I've been interviewing men and women, so it's like the men are like, oh yeah, like, but then now that I'm interviewing women, I'm just like super curious if it ever gets, But then like, and then do you have any particular perspective on dance or athleticism or if you don't, that's fine, but just curious.
Um, I think seeing like knowing like how much goes into movement. I didn't think about it as much, I think, when I was younger. Even if I tweaked something, I just like, oh, I'm just gonna dance through it. I just would ignore those kind of things because I saw them as minor strains here and there. Um, I think doing more vigorous or taxing dances, including Lindy Hop, um, you start to see things differently and risk with it, um, and seeing how much effort like I really see like now the perspective of like you have to practice it the same way you would like a sport like you have practice where like the idea of practicing if you want to be good per se like the idea of practicing and taking care of your body in the way that you would something else I definitely do believe that more so now and even aside from Lindy Hop like I was with a group for a long time off and on and the choreography when more floor work came in and more like inversions and all this other kind of stuff it's like the body's going through a lot and so I once there was so much of that I was exposed to I really felt like I was being tasked with doing more athletic type things just because of that kind of dancing. So to me, they go hand in hand, but I definitely have seen other dancers, like people who are like prima ballerina type things. Like if you're a professional, like how much strain your body can go through.
Yeah, and then I'm gonna real quick on the competitions that you said, like growing up was always like pretty competitive. I know you perform dance. I'm not offhand. I don't know. Do you compete in dance, or have you competed in dance?
I've done a few, some that were meant to be just for fun, but I'm too, I think I get too stressed out and too, I think that thing comes back when I was an athlete, even though that was so many years ago, that innate thing about wanting to do well. And if you don't do as well, even though you're trying to have fun, there's a lot of disappointment. So that inner competitor, even if I'm not at the best level compared to everybody else, or just compared to what I think I should be able to do, there's a lot of disappointment. So I think the last time I competed with my group, it was like a solo group a couple of summers ago was the last time we did it, which was I guess 2022 or 2023. It's hard to it was probably 2023, but like the time is kind of lost on me. But yeah, 2023. But I don't yeah, whether I would do that again, I'm not sure because I was like, maybe I shouldn't compete, which is some things I've gone up and down about because of how I see competition and just really wanting dance to stay in the space I need it to be in. And just how it's judged. Like, what are we judging as good dancing or like checking all the boxes that people are looking for? And that's it's very subjective depending on who's judging, what the event is, what the expectations are. So, and I don't always like conforming. So I don't know why I bother. So, but it's just more of most of it with the group, it was more about exposure. Like I want to perform where the performance opportunities, you have this huge crowd, you know it's going to be recorded. So, but it's a lot of investment for that. So it's
Yeah,
also the money.
true. I say so. It sounds like competing is a certain kind of it throws it into this judged and all the variables with that. Performing sounds like that's a little bit more like comfortable for you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I say I know that you'll do solo things. I know you had the group and yeah, so that's it's really interesting how things can feel different. I think it sounds like with performing you have a little bit more you say you don't always like to conform. So then if you're the one in charge of your performance, then you can kind of um guide it to be where you want it to be. So
Right.
yeah. Okay. Yeah. And so real quick, I'm gonna go. Did you happen to hear any of the hubbub around breakdancing breaking at the 2024 Summer Olympics last year? If not, it's cool. I just
I remember, yeah, I'm on Instagram probably too much. And there's still things that come up about Ragoon or however you say that. Like
yeah,
it's the idea that more she has probably gotten more publicity as being connected to this than anyone who's actually proficient at the dancing. And it's just like, of course, like why wouldn't that happen? It's just like the whole point of what it was meant to be and represent. Because I know people had maybe questions about who's judging and why those people and why this and why that and who's even competing and why are they the ones representing blah blah blah. So it's just like how do you get something to this place where it's meant to be exposure above maybe anything else, which I had a sense that was a bigger part of it than the competition itself, and then you end up with that.
right. Yeah. But yeah, that it was more it sounded like a good thing. Like, oh, we're recognizing that this is a athletic Olympic worthy, sport. Even it's a dance, but it's a sport. And then this happens, this appropriation. Um, yeah. So I'm gonna kind of continue with that kind of thread of do you have any other thoughts? I mean, we haven't talked much about blues, but before we get into that, do you have any thoughts in comparison of different music styles or different partnered or solo dances that you gravitate towards or that maybe you feel overlap with blues? It doesn't have to be connected to blues, but anything in that kind of realm?
I mean, like overlap with it. I think that the interesting thing over the last, like when I was still in Southern California and seeing the last few years of there being this space created, like I'm looking up something about a, a Lindy Hop event or what I expect to be where what's going to be played and what's going to be featured. I can dance Lindy Hop or a version of swing too. And there's also this blues component that's added on as something that's, it's not saying like it's in companion with, but as if there's supposed to be a connection. So aside from those moments or trying to check out some different places and seeing what is this about.
So I'm gonna loop back real quick.
Okay.
Do you remember the first time you danced the equivalent of blues dancing, like partner or soloed?
Probably when once I saw what was being once I saw like more recently what's being called blues, I was like, oh, this we did this, we just called it slow dancing when we were kids. Like the whole step that I was like, that's how people danced when I was like at like middle school, high school, and at slow dance, that's how people dance together. Just that basic step, touch, step, touch. So that's the
Yeah.
yeah, and if and I actually didn't like it because I didn't necessarily want to dance that close to a boy. I was like, no thanks. So I just preferred like dancing by myself because I just wanted to be free and dancing to faster stuff. But definitely the kids around me, like if people did slow dancing, that's what it was.
Yeah. And this was in
I didn't,
Flint?
yeah. Yeah. This was yeah in Flint, like well more high school because I really wasn't allowed to go to a dance in middle school, but in high school, yes, like if people slow danced, that was just, and I had no knowledge of connecting it as so-called blues dancing. And then even if I saw commercials, if I think about it, like when there's this one these old commercials that used to come on talking about different advertising different music collections, and that's how you would see the people dancing together like that same way. So I just knew that as slow dancing.
Yeah, I'd say like that's like when I'm doing my research, a lot of people like for the music itself or the movement, they're like if you go to, actual black majority areas, towns, they'll be like, "Oh, that's just dancing. Like that's just slow dancing." Like, and so it's been more because of this like differentiating it from Lindy, differentiating it from, and then there's a whole this confusion with fusion, like going, okay, this is blues dancing. Like this is what we're trying to convey. It's not, trying to differentiate it. They weren't setting out to be like blues dancing is very, but it's like, okay, there's a lot of confusion happening. So, yeah, so that makes a lot of sense to me. Um, yeah, and then, so yeah, I would say like you do, you have. I love watching you solo. It seems like that you really thrive in solo. Have you explored any specific types of solo dancing, or is it just more of a personal like movement exploration?
Yeah, at this point I see it now as just doing whatever comes out, because if I focus too much or try to limit it to, oh, I'm just going to do a jazz solo, and sometimes I get overly caught up in if I did enough moves this way or moves that, like I just feel really limited. And plus my experience with being exposed to like derivatives of Afro-Brazilian or just any kind of workshops that have been based in Congolese, Senegalese, other dances, having done samba, every other any kind of other lessons I've taken in addition to dances that I just did as a kid, like the party dances, which I understand now as party dances. Um, but it was just like whatever dancing was out, and you just do that whatever that dance is. So it's I want to. There's so much that's in here that I just want to be able to have some freedom with doing whatever the movement is. And if I like having to categorize it, it kind of makes my head hurt a little bit.
Yeah. So yeah, like I'm gonna to clarify. So it's like you have studied specific, like you've studied jazz, you studied, but then like you own it. Like that's not like it's in you. I've seen it. Like, but it's beautiful. The way that you meld and it's just yeah. So I don't even know how to describe it. Just like so engaging, I guess, to like see how you're able to fluidly like make it your own. And like this is Karen. Like I just want to throw that out there. Um so yeah. Okay, so real quick, I'm gonna ask about like tokenization. Have you ever felt like tokenized in any dancing? Like as as a black woman, or maybe in another way as a just as a woman, I don't know. But like in the scenes you've been in for like dance scenes, have you ever felt like a tokenization element?
Um, I don't think I've experienced that. I'm not not in the dancing that I've done, right? And not in the spaces I've been in. Um, nothing comes to mind in relation to that. Not for me personally.
Yeah, totally fair. Another thing, because is you're talking, you've done performance, you've done competition. Have you had any like it's obviously not straight up minstrelsy, but like have you ever experienced any like other um competitors, other performers dabbling in some like minstrelsy of like trappings of blackness, but they're not, maybe are not black performers?
The first thing that came to mind when you said that I was watching a competition years ago,
Mm.
and they were doing partner dancing, and these people were flopping all over the place. And I was just, and then they also, the couple that was doing this also separately did a group number, like in a group competition. And I just was like, is this what they think? It was, to me, it was like, I didn't know if it was supposed to be a joke or if because it was like where's the line between this is your actual performance and then you're just being a mess and you think that this is what because there can be like when you watch older clips like how the speed that people were actually dancing and the frenetic energy, and to me it was like, are you trying to imitate the frenetic energy and then also just being a clown? Because that's what it felt like. I couldn't understand the difference, or you just really didn't practice and you just really are falling on your butt, or you're just a mess. Like the core of the dancing isn't a mess. Like the energy, the frenetic energy of being able to like really generate that with someone and not look like a fool. That's so I just that's what it looked like, both in this couple, and then they separately also, like I said, they performed separately with the group, and the group number was the same. The solo, it was like a solo group thing, and was like, this is, I thought it was ridiculous. There are other dancers I've seen where I guess I wouldn't go as far as minstrelsy. I just question because they have molded a certain style
Mm.
so clearly, and it's like, okay, they're very, very good at what they do. I'm not questioning how much they practice. It's very clear. It's just there's something about when you watch, having seen so many different dancers and types of dance, where you see someone in their element, where they really are totally being themselves, and it looks like something that they've affected a style that whatever reason is like, but is that really you? And I don't know. I just question that. There's it's this line about where people are moving like 100% like themselves, and they're totally becoming themselves through the dance, which is like what you, and it's a sense you have about how a real proficient and like excelled performance or performer versus people who they've imitated a way of moving that they think is this way of being, and but it's not really them or their personality. It's just this it's an act. But that's which is a little bit different. But
Yeah.
that's the thing.
Yeah, it sounds like at most like they are definitely like, oh, this we want to be cool like this without maybe doing all of the due diligence kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like even if it's just like they didn't put in enough time to practice it. Um, yeah. So I'm gonna go down to I'm gonna go to nostalgia. Does nostalgia, or the lack thereof, have any impact on why you do or do not participate in blues?
Um, not necessarily. I don't see that as a factor.
How, like, so you guys said like you know the music. So when you have
Mm.
engaged in blues, it's been more of like, oh, I'm familiar with the music. This music is enjoyable to me. That kind of
Hmm.
fact.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, um, yeah. Okay, I'll do this one real quick. Have you experienced expectations of what the blues scene standards should be and how to behave that uphold or undermine Black American cultural standards? Like when you've been in blues spaces.
I think there's something in observing, because like you mentioned that fusion thing. So I was in a space where I think the event was billed as fusion, and I've been to it in a few rooms where it was like, oh, we have our fusion room. So going up, saying, okay, what's this about? And like just observing, as well as like blues things that have been shown to me, or I've looked at myself, and I'm looking at what what's happening, and I just I end up with a big question mark where there's something I was observing and I was like, yeah, this isn't somehow I was like, yeah, this isn't for me. Because I felt like what the something's some part of it is like overly structured. And then the part where you because I think one of the videos was like what they used to call Jack and Jill or mix and match kind of thing, where you just have people coming up and just like freestyling with one another. And there was something I'm not gonna say unnatural about it, but there's just something about like what they're supposed to be doing and what was registering for them as the dance, where I was like, I don't think I understand this. And I had the sense that I wouldn't necessarily fit in with it because of what I'm familiar with and what I know. So I was like, let me just that's that over there. And there's some particularities to it that I don't think I'll jive with.
Yeah, because that's I mean part of why I'm doing this like research is because blues is a Black American cultural legacy, and yet the spaces are predominantly not Black or predominantly white. Like especially at a ballroom dances, that's but like I think it's maybe at a actual bar, the odds are a little bit better, but like at ballroom hosted spaces, very predominantly white, or not Black at the very least, you know. So that's why I'm kind of just like, okay, so this is interesting, you know, like uh why or like not kind of like why the disconnect? Like is it that we and that's why I had the nostalgia questions like are white people like grasping you know like something that they're like oh I want like it's a fake nostalgia it's like a romanticization so that's kind of where the angle I'm coming from of like totally fair like if black people don't want to actually or black dancers don't want to you know engage in blues dancing because they're like what is this like when they go
Yeah.
into a ballroom right so yeah this I'm gonna tweak this question so matriarchy do you feel like from your experience black american culture is a matriarchal culture
Well, that's
or
an
has a
interesting
emphasis on
question.
matriarchy
I think it's I'll say women are not as diminished in Black American culture as they are, my sense, as women are in white American culture. I definitely don't feel like women are as diminished. There's definitely um, certain things that come up in conversation, probably more so in social media spaces that I wish weren't in social media spaces. But I should say, and there's a certain thing about how much expression and like when people talk about meme culture, how many Black women are referenced and used to express other people's emotions about things. Like I see it all of the time. Somebody like using a well-known Black woman's face and expressiveness to kind of like it's like yeah, and then like especially right now, people like should have listened to Black women, should have listened to Black women. It's like okay, so but that's that. But culturally, I think that, yeah, we're definitely not as, like I said, not as diminished.
Yeah. I think and that's, because so one thing I was talking about with the last person I interviewed was that, um, this is one of the few blues is one of the few partner dances where the follow has just as much voice as the lead. Most other partner dances, it's very much what is the lead dictating, or if I did something that lead didn't telegraph, I could make a like the dance would fall apart, or like it would be very hard. You'd have to stumble and recover. So I'm just curious, like if you've had noticed that in any the partner dancing, does it feel like do you feel like you get to have a voice when you're a follow in the various partner dancing that you do?
I feel like with people who are familiar with me as a dancer, there's certain people who would ask me to dance and they're like, like give me space. Um, and having like an expectation that I'm going to do certain movement on my own, which I always find interesting because I really do want to dance with someone, and it's just like I still want it to be a conversation. So but I do feel like that I have room for expressiveness, absolutely in Lindy Hop, like the space that's given when in the course of even in the course of a swing out, there's space given, and certainly with more people than others, but it definitely depends on the style and personality of the lead. Because some people cut off movement and like even in a turn, like catching your hand before and again stopping your momentum. So there's certain things in the way a person leads. However, by and large, there's definitely more room in that dance compared to something like tango or trying like certain other things that I've tried where like moments of expressiveness. It's just like styling are one thing, but really being able to add in a different kind of flair and flavor and room for like different footwork is a little bit different um for that dance to me.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, so another element that I wanted to explore is like the idea of code switching. I don't know, like, so it sounds like you went to like, live kind of a predominantly black, I think Flint is a predominantly black city, right? And like, I'm assuming when you went to high school it was predominantly black. Is that a correct assumption?
No, actually, like Flint, I mean, like now the population is, I think, pretty like much lower than it was back then, but it's relatively racially like a mixture, but it's definitely like southeastern Michigan as a whole is definitely like that's where you're gonna find compared to if you go like the Upper Peninsula, like you're gonna definitely gonna find more Black people in southeastern Michigan just generally across several cities. So there were schools like probably more schools than exist now that had predominantly Black student populations. Like the school right next door to my high school was a predominantly Black high school. My parents sent me to because they grew up going to Catholic school. We had to go to Catholic school. So, and the Catholic school, it was actually compared to what it could have been. There was a good mixture, but it was definitely predominantly white at school. The neighborhood
Yeah.
we grew up in, by the time people, probably some white flight was predominantly Black. The neighborhood and other social settings with my parents' friends, they were all Black people, etc. But the school, because of my parents, my mom in particular wanted to go to Catholic school. The school was predominantly white with other Black students, Filipino students, and so on and so on, so forth.
Yeah. Did you feel like you had like since there was a mixture of racial identities and cultural identities, did you feel like you had to code switch when you were at school, or do you feel like you've mostly been able to be like yourself throughout your, upbringing and into your adulthood?
Yeah, the code switching didn't feel like it happened as much because there were always other Black kids and like friends and other things where you just I just was how I was. But the code switching probably came more so in adulthood, like in certain spaces, or just like a muted kind of. at that point, I just learned like a muted presence where I'm just here to work. Yeah, I'm not going to talk a lot. So it was just getting done what I needed to get done in those spaces, and then like moving on. But I think that that's the interesting part about doing the work I do now. I had all different kind of jobs early on, where I'm just like, there's no room not to be yourself when you do what I call people work, like the social work and the therapy, because you want people to trust you. So in this work, there's all the years I've been doing this, it's just more and more of the expression of my own thoughts and personality, because like I said, there's no space for being fake or just having to like be like like whatever, because it doesn't work for me. That'd be exhausting, and I'm trying to build trust with people. So um but
Can you
certain
speak a little
corporate
bit?
job
Yeah. No, sorry.
no but certain corporate jobs that I had in the past, yeah, probably. But then, like I said, I was just more muted. I didn't, so I was like very much not social in those spaces at all.
Yeah. So yeah, I would say, can you speak a little bit more to your profession? Because I think like you're movement specialist. So I'd love for you to speak a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I got into, because of how much dance, like early in adulthood, I had more of a connection to dance helping me to express myself in a certain way, and really feeling like I needed to find a way, like doing some nonprofit work, working with some other artists. I was like, I need to find a way to do something myself. And I came to the determination that dance is the way to do it. So I had to look it up. I was like, what is like dance? And I don't know if I looked up therapy specifically. Either way, I found like, oh, this is a profession and this is what people do. And so then I had to figure out, because I definitely didn't want to stay in the corporate world. I was like, I'm over this. This is like stealing my soul. I can't do it. And so which is like a little bit of an exaggeration, but um I just didn't want to stay in that space. So looking up what the options were, the idea of going back to school, which is something I was like, oh, again. But I felt like that's the thing I needed to do. So I studied, there were a couple of different ways to study it, and I studied social work and dance movement therapy, like at the same time. There were different programs versus going to one program and maybe getting like a counseling degree. Like I didn't want to do that. I wanted something where I could have more options. So, and then social work itself led me into doing jobs that I probably didn't think I was ever going to do, and continuing to study dance movement therapy, like as the psychotherapeutic intervention. So it's yeah, it's something that helped me to understand. And now all these years later, after starting that, because that was like, what year was that? It was 2011, and now it's 2025. So when I started my programs, and then now all these somatic interventions that people are incorporating into different therapies, and oh, the body keeps the score. Like people keep mentioning that book, like dance movement therapy as a profession has existed for 50, over 50 years, like longer than that. So it's just like the, is it the 60th annual thing is coming up next year or this year, whatever. But yeah, so it's just kind of the awareness of that, and how and understanding, like when I was studying it, one of the ladies in my cohort said this has existed in other cultures forever, indigenous cultures, African cultures, like what are you talking about? So there's that. There is that considered like kind of an appropriation of certain ideas, like circles, and like how we like mirror people, because other cultures have had um ritualistic things that include movement, that include music, far and beyond this profession ever existing. So it's like, how do we acknowledge that, which is something that people are talk about a lot in the profession, bringing cultural aspects. So some people do more dance, like we have to lead with the body, lead with the dance, versus with Western ideas about um, diagnosing people and what that means, which is like, yeah, because that gets to the root of what other people have done for a long period of time. I get to the point where after doing all this dancing, learning more about Lindy Hop, learning more about the history of the dance, learning more about different movement interventions, it's like, yeah, that's how I think it's one of the things that reasons I think Black people and Indigenous people have survived here in particular, and any place else. Because we have not lost connection to music, we have not lost connection to movement. When instruments were taken away, we found other way to create sound. Like there's this connection to like you're trying. Why you need to take a drum away? Why you need to remove this? Why you need to do that? Right? And it's just like to kind of and people we always find a way. Like there people still find a way to continue to create, and how much movement and music are expressions. When you talk about blues, when you talk about jazz, they are extensions and expressions of what we're experiencing in our lives, and then the movement goes with the music, right? And so that's why it's just one of the things that it helps to keep us going. And I think for in Black culture, we just evolve, like it evolves from one like decade and generation to another into something a little bit different. And so people still stay connected to it even if they call it something else.
Yeah. And I kind of how much of that evolution do you feel is it's like because of appropriation from other cultures? Do you feel like is it that may not always be the motivator, but that is a element of this like need this evolution of innovation?
Some of it, like when I hear about, I think about watching like Ken Burns jazz, like the history of certain people talk about the musicians wanting people were performing for like for dancers, and some people wanting to find like just as a musician, okay, yeah, I'll play for you, dancer, and I also want to have my own expression with this instrument and with people that's beyond playing for dancers, and how that evolved, like the music evolved from just artists' own desires to express themselves differently. Or like there was something watching like BB King. There was something watching this thing on BB King years ago, and I believe what he said was like playing for different audiences, and somebody saying like we're tired of like singing the blues all the time, like we need something else. So it's just like the blues are an important part of expression in the culture, and we can't, we don't want to be stuck in one place. Like there's different issues and situations call for a different expression. Like how somebody expressing themselves in the 50s and 60s versus how somebody's expressing themselves in the 20s. There's some things that are going to be similar, like the root of what people are dealing with and what they're fighting against um, is a little bit different. So how does the expression meet the moment? And we respond to and evolve with and sometimes are not just evolving with, we are leading in our own evolution and change. Just natural, some of it's natural. I think artists get like me, I could say like in terms of expressing myself, it's like I can't keep doing the same thing. Like I'm not going to be doing the same thing every time. So we would do a choreography. It's like, okay, done with that, next. Like we're not performing that again. I don't want to come back to it. Like there was so it's just like, yeah, I need to do something else. Like people just need to express themselves differently over time. And there's just natural, I think just a natural innovation and creativity. Um and when you see it evolve over decades, like people see they take something from here and take something from there, and they see this, and you know, um so some of it might be related to, oh, now these people are coming in this space. Yeah, I'm gonna move on. I mean, that happens too, maybe, but I don't know.
Yeah, what was popping to mind was like a freshness, like looking like I need that fresh inspiration, like to feel inspired to express and wanting it to not feel old, stale, repetitive, like wanting to find like how can I do this in a way that, you know, feels new to me again or feels fresh to me again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think part of that too, like the thing that makes me think of is that when we talk about what we're experiencing in the real world and people wanting you, like very often the message is like as if we'll just accept how this is and everything will be fine. So the real world wanting you just to stay exactly where you are, like the external world is like, absolutely not. So sometimes it's just like the evolution of expression because of that push to just accept conditions that are not acceptable.
Right. Like, yeah, that like, oh, heck no. Like, yeah. Okay, so then another category I had is like sensuality as opposed to like sexuality or hypersexualization. This comes up a lot, like people perceive blues as very sexy. But I'm just curious, like you can like as a black woman dancer, have you experienced people like projecting things, like misinterpreting or anything to this kind of sensuality as opposed to like sexuality?
I haven't experienced or witnessed or seen as much of that personally. I've been actually really pleased to see there are more people I recently discovered or been following, like within the last year or so, who are doing different forms of like somebody was doing research and doing like shake dancing and other like shake dancers and the history of different kind of movement. Which it's like learning the specific terms and specific ideas and references to other people and this history of this movement, um, especially seeing women doing the movement. I like seeing those connections to silence people who are a little too focused on policing, in particular Black women, and how they're moving or not moving. And I just think they just don't know. And I'm still learning as much about that historical connection between movement, its particular um, like gyrations and wines and everything where some of this stuff is not so salacious, like in terms of like the history of it and how it's a form of expression for like we like the body is used to express all aspects of life. Yes, including sex. Yes, including procreation. Yes, including all the cycles and systems that our body goes through and what that's like. And I hate some of the shame that people try to unload onto people. Just some have I watched some things I was just like, whoa, that's a lot. Yeah. There are things I've seen that I mean, and I still don't want to police people's bodies. If they're moving in a way that they really want to move, I want to like give that person that they have that space and ownership of their body and the autonomy of their movement. And there are ways, because I was just thinking of doing another a series of videos, and like I really feel like it's important to like really like feel and incorporate like the slower or more gyrating type movement in a way that I just like seeing the expression of all the things the body can do. And people who perceive any and everything as sexual or inappropriate, because some people see any of it that way. There's no middle ground for them. And it's just like, you know, so yeah, I see sometimes commentary or projection onto other people's way of moving. I just wish people had there was more understanding about a longer history of like all the ways movement is incorporated into culture or has been, and maybe we've lost contact with that. And it's difficult when we think about the sexualization of certain people, in particular Black women, um, and other women. But it's yeah, I don't like the idea of limiting movement because of those ideas.
Yeah. So I'm like, I've been trying to recall. We had this conversation several years ago, um, about like I think I was telling you like blues is what helped me like connect to myself, like connect to my body, be like, oh, don't need to be ashamed or afraid of my body. And then, and you were all, as a practitioner. So I was trying, I'm like, we were talking about like this using movement as to like ditch the shame, like find yourself. So yeah, just like you covered a lot of that and what we were just saying of just like um yeah, like be fully integrated in yourself. Like
Right, right,
yeah.
right.
And how a lot of like culturally, like white and Western cultures are very like puritanical or very like, you know, um disconnected. Even like a lot there's those who don't even hug each other, like handshake only, whatever. It's just like such a contrast of being in tune with your body and in tune with like all of your facility and what you can do with it. Yeah. Um we covered I think pretty much everything. I'm trying to see if I like um yeah, I guess, or the one thing I like, I think you've sort of answered it already, but like for code switching, we talked about corporate. Like, do you feel like you ever have to code switch when you're dancing, or sound, or like what you're talking about, like you want to just be your genuine expression? Do you feel like you found a way to like maintain your self authenticity?
Um, I think I have to I've had to like, get in a certain mode in my mind because I think I there's somewhere along the way like being in so I love dancing and I love dancing with people. I think just being in certain crowded spaces or I end up having such low expectations for engagement or such low expectations for like having the dances I want to have or whatever that is. So I think I stay very off. Sometimes I stay pretty muted or like I've been like would walk around a lot and just um not be as present. So I sometimes end up making my thoughts, the self-fulfilling prophecy kind of thing. And then I just kind of like wander around and say like, okay, who are my sure bets? Where can I just be and know I can have a decent time? And there's like limited expectation aside from just the dancing. So for me, it's just like focusing on the dancing itself. And I always feel like when I'm moving and I'm kind of letting go, that I'm just being myself. Because the weird thing about being muted is if I'm with someone who, especially someone maybe I haven't talked to in a while, and we're given the space to just sit one to one and talk, I can blab on for a long time. That's the thing. So people who are probably working with me know me as this like really quiet, like not really expressive person. And I think and a lot of times in the scene, not saying much. Sometimes I'm maybe not even really visible just because I'm like roaming around and observing a lot sometimes. Um, but so in that way, it's just like, am I kind of a shell of myself? I think for the point for me is just as long as I'm dancing, like that's the ultimate expression for me. Like so that to me is like as long as I get to dance and I can really feel like I'm totally myself, then that's good enough. Because to me that this at this point it's more authentic than some of the conversations.
Yeah,
At least in that scene. Um, so yeah.
yeah. And one thing I'm curious about is like, do you feel like you have to initiate a lot when it's a like if two partner, do you feel like is it pretty even kill whether you're asking or being asked? Because one thing I've heard is a lot of Black women, when they go to partner dances, they get ignored. Like like people kind of don't know how to interact, or I don't know. Like, so I'm just curious if you've experienced anything like that.
It would really depend on where I went. Like if I went to a place where I knew if my friend Bernard wasn't going to be there. So I was like guaranteed not to get a few chances because he's not going to be there. And then I'm like, I have to, am I going to go and hopefully see like just a couple of people who I know for sure will dance with me. And then probably in the last couple of years, even though I didn't go out as much, like I really didn't go out as much the last couple of years, especially before I left, is that there for sure I'd probably be going to places that I for sure knew that I was going to these the people, and there were certain people who, as soon as they saw me, it's like, "Oh, yeah, come on, let's go." Um, but that's familiarity. If I'm going to a brand spanking new place, like I went to a place a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, "Okay, finally, I'm finding a place. They have a dance. It's like maybe an hour away from where I am right now." And I took a class to make sure that people would like have some familiarity because everybody else knows everybody, and I'm new here. So got to dance with a few people, and it was fine. And then went to the dance the next day. It's one of those things where I asked myself, "Oh, should I have gone to another event?" Because then if was more familiar, would that have helped? But sometimes I feel like not really. And this is sometimes where I wouldn't participate, where I would walk around and not participate in certain dances. Like even though if I paid for an event, because it would be like really terrible. So unless sometimes find people to ask, um, people you kind of like people who do that look around, you feel like you might be their last ditch. It's like, hey, one of them, sure, let's dance. But other than that, it's like yeah, I don't there are a lot of times I didn't feel like earlier on when I started, um like where I started dancing and the hopefulness for that was different because people knew you were a newer dancer and that place was just much more friendly. But going to other places and from then on for a long time, it was kind of rough, especially if I tried to travel. It was like, oh, yeah, this isn't good. So it got to that point where it felt like you had to be known enough for somebody to want to dance with you, whatever that looks like. And yeah.
You have to kinda earn it or prove it or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes even if the people may be familiar with me, I was like, and I said to myself, like, maybe just people don't like my dancing. I was just like, or like some people who I knew who were at a place and they just wouldn't ask you to dance. And so there were times where I practiced like over the years because it's been like I started like late 2001 specifically with swing and the variations of swing. So all these years later, so it got to the point where some years in, I was like, okay, I'll do the thing where I go ask people. So there's sometimes I would prep myself to ask some nights because it would be this like, well, oh God, I'm standing where I'm supposed to stand. I'm snapping my fingers or whatever. Nothing's happening. So it was like one of those things. It was up and down. Even if I had been around for a while, it was just like some people want to dance with you and just a lot of other people don't. So I don't know what that status is or where it makes a difference, but it's like one of the reasons I started doing my own birthday dances. Like when there's specifically a circle formed for you to be featured, and it's hard for people to gut in, and they're gutting in with other people. I was like, you know what? Just hell with this stuff. I'm gonna do my own because one time it was like really, really crappy. Because I was like, that's usually the space where you would see some people at least give a turn and move on. But I've had some that were really, really sucky where they'd be switching off to dance with somebody else, but not necessarily with me. And so I was just like, let me just do my own thing. That's half of the reason I started doing those videos every year.
There you go. Yeah. So you're
So
like, "Yeah,
yeah,
it's my fulfillment." Like, you're like
yeah,
getting your birthday dance on.
right.
Yeah.